So in our last video, we went ahead and assembled this camshaft template, and we named it camshaft template for a very good reason, because we're going to reuse it for multiple different cams. But now we're actually ready, or we should be ready, to go ahead and place a pair cam, or what we're going to use, which is our pair cam, into our onto our camshaft. So we'll go to pair to cam, hit open, and go ahead and place it in. Right click OK. And we can go ahead and start connecting it. And we're actually going to we're going to go to Constrain. We're going to use our mate again, and hopefully it'll make a little bit more clear what we tried to discuss in our last video, which was the degrees of freedom, how they work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this, I want to mate. I want to select with a mate the inner circles here. And make sure that you're getting that center line, the two outer circles, and I want to mate that to the axle of our camshaft. So again, it should highlight the cylinder, and I hit apply, and you can see it locks it on there. Why is it so important to use a mate instead of an insert? Well, because it can not only rotate around our cam, but it can also slide left and right. And this is what I mean by degrees of freedom. So it can rotate, so there's 1 degree of freedom in a rotation, but then it can also go left to right. It can also go left to right, excuse me. And there are 6 degrees of freedom in total. So there's 3 directional, it can go up and down. Of course, this can't go up and down. This follower can go up and down, for example. That's that degree of freedom. But this can't because, well, it's connected to this axle, which is stuck in our box. And it can't go forward and back either. Neither of these can go forward and back. So that's another degree of freedom. But this lost both of those directional freedom, so it's only left with the 3rd degree of freedom, which is left and right. And then of course there's 3 rotational, but it's only left with the last one, which is spinning around in this direction, this sort of front flip and back flip rotation, as is this cam, or this camshaft, this axle handle I should say, for our camshaft, if you notice. Speaking of, we can go ahead and align, and that's actually what the work planes are for. You might have noticed that there are work planes on both of these. If you notice as I spin them, there are certain work planes that can line up, and we actually want them to line up if you think about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mate those 2 work planes together that clearly are parallel to each other. So we'll go to Constrain, we'll go to Mate, and I want to select this thinner work plane on my cam here with the work plane of our axle. And we hit apply, and you might notice, well, now it can now they spin together, which is kind of what we want. It's kind of the idea. Although we didn't really lose a degree of freedom with our axle because it can still go left and right, it's just constrained to our axle. To lose that 2nd degree of freedom, that directional degree of freedom, we need to line it up with our follower here. So if you notice, it can line up if we line up these 2 work planes here. So we're going to do the exact same thing. Let's go ahead and pick a view that we can see it. We're going to go to Constrain, we're going to go to Mate, and I'm going to lock this work plane onto this follower's work planes. And we hit apply. And so what does that do? Well, if you notice, now it's stuck in place. I can't move this camshaft left or right anymore. It can only rotate, and it can only rotate along with its axis, giving us only 1 degree of freedom. And so the next constraint is actually going to be a new one, and it's going to lock on our follower to our cam so they spin, or they move together, I should say. So let's take a look at that. So we're going to go to Constrain, and we're going to go to a new type of constraint, not motion, but transitional. It wants us to select 2 faces, and it's very important that you select the correct 2 faces and in the right order. If you don't, you're going to have to start over. You need to rewind this video, I guess, if you need to. But what are the 2 faces? So I want to select the 2 faces that I want to connect, excuse me. So that would be the bottom of this follower, so I'll go ahead and select that, and I want to connect it to not the inside, but the face that it's going to wrap around. And you click any of the faces that you want it to wrap around, but one of these faces here that the follower would connect to. Don't click on the side, but one of these rounded edges, or one of these edges on the outside. And those are the 2 faces. I'll select them again. I'll go to Constraint, Transition, and I want to select this bottom face, and then one of these faces on my cam. It doesn't matter which one is, as long as it's one of the outer edges that it would connect to. And I hit apply, and now if you notice, as I spin my axle, it will push up the cam, which is kind of the idea, and it'll push it up. You can play it around with it. You can actually measure how much it rises up and down with your ruler as you spin your axle. You can see it rises at different distances. As we get to certain angles, it doesn't actually spin at all. It doesn't go up and down at all, which is kind of obvious because it's kind of circular here. It's not changing the radial distance until we get to a certain place on our angle. And speaking of which, we can actually do one more thing. We can make this an animation. So right now we can just spin it around and see how it works. We can actually turn this into an animation. So let's look at how to do that. Let's go ahead and go to Constrain, and let's go to Angle. And I want to go ahead and select this 2 angle again, the directed angle off to the left. And I'm going to click on my work plane. And I want to angle it off of this face right here, this front face here. And we hit apply. So now what happens, and actually I'm going to go ahead, I want my ruler, I want that option closed out because I don't want to mess with any of these constraints. I actually want to mess with the constraint that I just put one on, which was my followers, or my axle handle, my axle handle's work plane. I'll open that up and you'll see that angle constraint that we just added. And this is so important because I can actually open that up and change that angle. I can go from 10 degrees, I can change it to 45 degrees, I can open it up and I can go to, well, 90 degrees. It's kind of obvious, but well, make sure you select it correctly. But I can double click on it and go to 180 degrees if I want to. And actually, looks like we're having some problems with that. So let's try just changing it just a little bit, 105, and see what happens. You can see as it's starting to lift it up, and you actually, what did that do? Well, that started lifting up the follower because we're starting to get to a point in our file where it's, or in our rotation where it's starting to push up the follower. And why is this so important? So I'm actually going to go back to 0 degrees on this. So it's back at the top here. And I want to right click on this angle constraint, which I can't rotate anymore because it's stuck on the angle constraint. If I wanted to, I could delete this constraint and then I could rotate, I could free rotate it. But I actually want this angle constraint here to make the animation. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to go down to Drive. And I'm going to go ahead and hit, well, if I hit play, you'll see it move 10 degrees. I can go back and forth because it's saying it's starting at 0 degrees and going to 10. I'm going to change it to not 360, but 3,600. And what does that mean? Well, that's 360 times 10. 360 degrees is 1 rotation or 1 full circle. So 3,600 should be 10 full rotations. Let's go ahead and watch. And you can see it's going to spin 10 times around. You can see how the follower moves as it does. You can actually look at the angle that it's at the moment, and you can see the follower rise up and rise down. It's kind of fun to play with. And in fact, we can actually open this up and we can slow this down. We change the amount of value of the total number of steps. We change it to 0.5, and let's make it 0.5, not 0.54, and you'll notice that it's slowed way down. Or I can make it 2. Don't hit enter. Let's go ahead and open that back up. Right click and drive and hit play. And you can see it's going a little bit faster. I can open up this again and make it 4, and it's going to spin even faster. And you can kind of play around with it. It's kind of fun. And you can even record the animation if you want. We're not going to learn how to do that in this video. And you saw we just saw save reminding. That's actually a good place to stop and actually rename this file. We're not going to hit save because I don't want to change the template. I don't want to lose my template here. But what I want to do is, once you're done playing with it, is don't hit save, but go to File, Save As, because this is actually not going to be our new template. We don't want the pair cam on our template. We want to go ahead and name it something else. So I'm going to call it camshaft, and I'm going to give it the name of our file that we put on, which, if you look, was pair 2. So I'm going to call it camshaft pair 2 assembly. And hit save. And why is that so important? Well, because now, select yes, and because now when I go to open, I can open up my pair cam already built, but I can also open up the template without it, so I can add more cams to that later and save those files as well, and I can have multiple different files to work with. And one more thing, you can actually change the name of this angle to something more to your liking, like rotation drive, or turn handle. We can even call it just something, any turn handle. And so you can remember, well, this is the constraint that you would run a drive on to turn the handle, turning the cam, raising up the follower up and down. And of course, you don't have to name that, but I find it's nice to name these. That way you don't accidentally change an angle constraint instead that you created on something else. Like we added an angle constraint to our ruler. We have a name for it. You can edit your names. And it just makes everything organized and easier to find. And that way you just don't get confused. But again, that's your choice. You don't have to add that if you don't want to.